It's going to be a challenging tournament for England, and I think there might be some revisionism about the Gareth Southgate era. It will be a success reaching the quarterfinals. Getting beyond that, there are so many variables.
England could go all the way this World Cup thanks to a German, and this is why. Hi everyone, Niall Paterson here, host of This Is Why, and in England at least, the temperature is rising, and not just because the sun's finally come out. Thoughts are turning to the World Cup. Scotland qualifying for the first time in 30 years, England hoping for a repeat of their winning run of 60 years ago. We now know the 26 names who will be wearing the three lions. Manager Thomas Tuchel has raised plenty of eyebrows, and not just because he's German. Some very big names have been left at home. Not that any England fan will be complaining if they actually win the thing, and if the cup truly is coming home, Thomas Tuchel's nationality will be very quickly forgotten. So today we thought we'd learn a little bit more about one of the best managers in the game. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris caught up with Tuchel after the squad was announced. I spoke to him backstage at Wembley after the press conference. Rob, big old day for English football, but also a big old day for Thomas Tuchel himself. I mean, take us back to the beginning. Where's he from?
Well, the fact is, Thomas Tuchel is the first German manager of the England men's national team. And, this is one of the biggest moments announcing his squad for a World Cup. But it's a moment that he'll be reflecting on how he reached this point, because at the age of 25, his playing career ended through injury. And at that point, you've got an uncertain direction. He knew he wanted to get into coaching, but you couldn't imagine then that you'd end up in some of the biggest jobs in the world, Paris Saint-Germain, Chelsea, England.
Oh, okay, so he was a professional footballer. I mean, of what sort of level? Were we talking kind of international standard? Where did he fit in?
Tuchel was very much the lower levels in Germany. He's not one of these coaches who ever played for the top teams at all. Although we have seen coaches who never played at all at any high level, like Jose Mourinho. So he was someone who was really studying the game, and the fact he wanted to go on to take a business degree showed he was sort of broadening his horizons.
So he got a business degree. We also know he worked behind a bar. I mean, how does he go from that to management?
Well, at that point, he starts to sort of focus on coaching. He gets his opportunity at Stuttgart. Ralf Rangnick was the person who appointed him as a youth coach. Rangnick himself managed Manchester United briefly in recent years, will be leading Austria at this World Cup. And he built his way through the youth teams. We do see some managers who go very much into the entry level, right at the top suddenly into, Mikel Arteta. His first senior management job was with Arsenal. Now he's won the Premier League. And he completed his various coaching qualifications while getting those opportunities in the youth teams in Germany.
So what kind of coach has he been? I mean, just running through some of the clubs that he's worked for. Mainz, Dortmund, Paris Saint-Germain, Chelsea, Bayern Munich. I mean, these are all very, very different clubs, very, very different setups. So he's been signed by, some of the biggest clubs in Europe, but he didn't always stay very long, did he?
Well, he brings a certain attacking philosophy to his style of play, very much on the front foot, his back three, and it's that sort of tactical nous that has endeared him to the clubs that want to bring him on board. You've got to cope in quite challenging situations there at, Paris Saint-Germain. So much pressure, particularly to deliver European glory, which you didn't manage to do because you dominate the French league so adeptly. And, he has called things out. He did at Paris Saint-Germain when he was talking about, you might need to be more of a politician than a coach at times as well in that fraught relationship with the Qatari ownership. But still, when he left right at the end of 2020, he was at Chelsea within a few weeks. And, early in 2021, he did achieve great things. He won the Club World Cup in February of 2022. But then at his time at Chelsea, it coincided with Roman Abramovich being sanctioned, him being forced to sell the club, new owners coming in. He was then out by September. And you got a real sense that things did spiral out of control quite quickly. Talk of disputes over transfer strategies over the summer. I suppose it shows someone who's willing to stand his ground. You might accuse some managers of just acquiescing with the ownership to secure your position for the long term. But if he hasn't liked something, he has called it out. He achieved great success in a short period of time, success that many managers might not get in their entire careers. But there's often this focus, particularly when he took the England job, about, well, how did it unravel so quickly?
So was that his most successful period as a club manager? I mean, as we've already said, he has worked for some of the biggest names in world football.
Certainly in terms of winning the Champions League, the biggest prize of them all in Germany, winning the Bundesliga title with Bayern Munich, but that should be pretty much a given their strength there. Paris Saint-Germain winning the French league, that's also to be expected, back-to-back titles, given the financial might of the club as well.
I saw a quote about him that basically says, he can improve a team almost immediately, that there is a tactical nous that this man brings to the table in a pursuit of perfectionism that really can improve a squad, but maintaining relationships is a lot harder for him. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, and maybe not every manager is set up to stay at a club a decade like Pep Guardiola, or 26 years like Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, and you can deliver short-term success, particularly if a club needs turning around in a particular moment. With England, there's a sense, well, perhaps a different direction tactically is needed after Gareth Southgate. Maybe some overlooking his successes taking England to back-to-back finals when the men's team hadn't reached a final since 1966. So in terms of Tuchel's approach to the job, is actually perhaps getting a team in order, but international football is very different because you have so little time with the players, something that Tuchel reflected on in his interview with me after the squad announcement for the World Cup. So you've got to be able to have an impact, and particularly international football, you've got to approach things differently. You're not with the players the whole time. You're being loaned them by their club, so you can't necessarily have masses of time to influence things tactically, but that is demanded of an international coach to be able to ensure the players can work to your plan, can adapt and change if necessary in a tournament. So that's the whole reason that they're brought in at such great expense by countries like England, and why you bring a manager like Tuchel in on these multi-million-pound contracts to be able to work out how to maximise your time with those players, even if it's limited, and also managing team dynamics as well and maintaining harmony in the dressing room. But there's always that sense when he arrived in the England job, how long will he stay in it, given the fact that he does perhaps move through jobs fairly quickly. But he has found this new extension fairly recently taken him beyond the World Cup, because it would have been quite problematic, I think, to enter the World Cup with the contract expiring at the end of it. The question is actually, should you judge managers at international level on a tournament-by-tournament basis and then extend? But in the managerial market as well, Tuchel's got that experience, so if you didn't have him signed up to a contract, he could be prized away by a club.
Let's talk a bit more about that appointment back in 2025. England looking for a manager, the FA come calling. Now, Rob, as you well know from our previous conversations, I'm not the world's biggest expert on English football, but I do know one thing. You don't like the Germans, so appointing a German as England manager, that must have been pretty controversial.
Well, there are some who believe there shouldn't be a foreign manager of the England team at all, but it's taken a foreign manager of the women's team, Serena Wiegmann, to deliver success, back-to-back Euros titles. But it takes us back to when Sven-Göran Eriksson was appointed as the first foreign manager of the England team at the start of the new millennium. And the reaction then is something I didn't think we necessarily repeated again. Some of the more vocal elements of the punditry class, some of the papers very much railing against England being led by a foreigner. And yet we did see it when Tuchel was appointed, the Daily Mail back page, a big headline, about his unsuitability for the job. And you can approach it on a few levels. One, that you believe international football should see the coaching staff also be of the same nationality of the team, just as the players have to be. Or you could actually look at it a slightly more philosophical approach, which is what message does it send out in terms of the coaches that you're bringing through domestically, that you have to look abroad to bring a manager in rather than necessarily having that pipeline. And we thought there might have been a shift in things when Gareth Southgate was appointed. Then he was under 21s manager, then reluctantly at first, but stepped into the senior job.
Well, how have England performed in the Tuchel era? I mean, especially compared to that which came before. I mean, Gareth Southgate did wonders for England, arguably, but it certainly felt a little bit more touchy-feely around Wembley back when he was in charge.
Yeah, very much a different approach of managers, and we see this reflected things like in the Dear England play, adapted from an article that went out in his name ahead of the Euros final in 2021, very much about how connecting with the nation at a time, particularly in all the post-Brexit divisions with Southgate in charge, helping sort of bring the country together through political turmoil. And he very much adopted that role as sort of unifier of the nation. With Tuchel, very much, he's a football figure, he's not here, particularly as an outsider, to try and talk about really as much as what football means to the country.
What's his man management like? I mean, Southgate, we've already said, was a bit touchy-feely and arms round the shoulder type of guy.
What we see with Tuchel is actually how you manage some of those player relationships, and he's willing to call things as they are. There's been some problematic moments and, potentially still fraught with one of the great hopes for the team, Jude Bellingham of Real Madrid. The fact that he managed to say last year that his mum was repulsed by him, and this created a whole storm. It took him many months to attempt to sort of diffuse the situation. And, you don't really want to be falling out with one of the great talents of the team. And even if you are perhaps the biggest star of the team, certainly the greatest young star coming through, the fact that you had the final say, your name alone, your reputation doesn't get you on the squad list. If you think for that particular camp, for those particular matches, when you're bringing the players together, that you don't believe they're suitable. And it has been a question ever since he took the England job, not about what he'd necessarily achieve at the start, but how it might all end, really. Not to say in glory, but would there be some great, fallout? But, you do want Mavericks at the same time, and, some might question sort of Gareth Southgate's touchy-feely approach, maybe being too timid. So then we ask for more of a disciplinarian, and that's certainly what we had with Fabio Capello when he replaced Steve McLaren, instilling this new tough regime. But that then led to players being unhappy at the 2010 World Cup, feeling it was a bit of a miserable environment in South Africa. And that's very much what an international manager has to do. How do you cope with leading your players when you're on a 2-week camp together, which is longer than you're together with your club side a lot of time? How do you cope when you're away at a tournament? It can be for a month, even up to 2 months away, with training camps beforehand and the tournament itself. And it's maintaining that harmony that's so necessary. And it's where, you do need a strong coaching staff as well. And sometimes you do need an arm around the shoulder, not always sort of bellowing things out. And, you need to have the players on board to, deliver that success. Because it's success that ultimately is about the whole country coming together very often around these moments. It's happened very often. It's England at major football tournaments that brings really the nation together, or indeed Scotland as well this summer.
Let's discuss what's been going on. Where you are today? Look, anytime we get an England manager announcing their selection for a major competition, you get an insight into the mindset of that particular manager. What did we learn about Thomas Tuchel today?
Yeah, well, making these squad decisions is tough. You can get quite a strong reaction from players. Gaza was furious at the La Manga resort in Spain in 1998 when he was dropped from a final squad to go to that tournament. And, we've seen a bit of a backlash from the calls at this World Cup squad selection. Harry Maguire, Manchester United defender, going on social media after being told he wasn't going to complain about being shot and gutted. His mum, his brother, they also posted as well. And maybe you got a sense from the reaction to being dropped, a reason why Tuchel didn't call up Maguire in the first place. If that's your reaction to not being called up by your country, maybe you might not fit into the team dynamic for the tournament. And a word used by Tuchel was about wanting players who are unselfish, and that means it's about how you can cope. Players can go to a World Cup and not play a single minute. You have to cope with being on the bench, and you could be away for a month, 2 months without playing. And what we've seen in Tuchel is, some bold calls, leaving out some experienced players. Phil Foden, Manchester City, meant to be a bright hope going forward for years to come. Cole Palmer, starring with Chelsea at the Club World Cup last summer, another young talent coming through. But perhaps we're also seeing that some of these young players are maybe playing too much too young. When someone like Tuchel looks at how they're performing for their club size, well, their name on reputation alone is not enough to take them to a World Cup if he does not believe they can particularly cope with the heat of the United States, where they're playing their group stage games and being away for that length of time, when last summer they might barely have had a break. But, also Trent Alexander-Arnold left Liverpool last summer, went to Real Madrid, one of the biggest clubs in the world. That should have been a moment to take his game to a new level, but, completely fallen out of favour with Tuchel. But then there are players who've got their opportunities to come back into the fold. One of the biggest shocks, Ivan Toney, who had only played 7 minutes of football for England since the Euros in 2024 last summer for Tuchel. But he went out to Saudi Arabia. That looked to be the end of his England career, but maybe it's experience in the heat that's got to replace at this World Cup. Back up to Harry Kane, needing more striking options, given that ability to cope with the fatigue. I also think, in particular, players have shown that they can transform their fortunes around. Mainu was starring for England at the Euros in 2024. At Manchester United, he'd fallen out of favour under Ruben Amorim. A new coach comes in Michael Carrick at the start of the year. He gets his opportunities again, and here he is back in England contention going to a tournament. Marcus Rashford, in reverse, left Manchester United on loan because he wasn't getting opportunities, goes to one of the toughest clubs in the world to be successful at Barcelona, has won La Liga title, and he is going to the World Cup.
I mean, I'm going to call it, Rob. I think leaving out Harry Maguire is just daft. But there has always been the argument about Thomas Tuchel that his greatest strength is knockout football, competition football, part of the reason perhaps that England picked him. And I wonder whether this group of 26 looks like a tournament squad rather than the 26 best footballers for the positions that they would play.
And that's what he did indicate, that it's not necessarily about who individually you might select as your best players if you were sort of weighing up all the individual stats for your fantasy team. It's about how they actually are on a real life pitch and how they are blending together as a group of players. But Harry Maguire's sort of vast experience from tournaments has been so integral to this resurgence of the three lions under Gareth Southgate, largely, that consistent figure in the heart of defence. And whether you need that experience as well, and it's about those judgment calls and the pressurised moments, particularly in central defence, when one misstep can actually prove so costly. But the fact he talks about team spirit so often, needing a balanced squad, shows it's not just about loading necessarily your bigger stars in, but so often, yes, thinking about how they work together. How do they cope being on the bench, willing to come on and make such an impact as well? And the way he's called up Jordan Henderson again for his fourth tournament, he could become the first England man to play at 4 World Cups if he does get on the pitch. But you also wonder as well, since squad size expanded to 26, in part it was during the pandemic to cope with absences, that you can take a player like Jordan Henderson, who you're not necessarily relying on having to play him, but he's actually quite good in the group effectively as partly an extra coach while still being able to have a contribution on the pitch.
Rob, it has been 60 years since that thing that you lot can't stop banging on about actually happened. And I'm just wondering, well, obviously you know that you're not going to win the World Cup because Scotland are going to win the World Cup, but how far do you think you can go?
It's going to be a challenging tournament for England, and I think there might be some revisionism about the Gareth Southgate era. Suddenly reaching those back-to-back Euros finals won't seem as bad as actually some England fans think. They think they should have won the trophy. It will be a success reaching the quarterfinals. Getting beyond that, there are so many variables, particularly the length of the tournament, coping with the workload. And of course, all the players, all the teams have to deal with the same workload as well. Some players and teams might be more used to the heat, but it's particularly the English season, which is very grueling. Not only the size of the Premier League, but having 2 domestic cup competitions as well, which not many countries have. And Arsenal reaching the Champions League final as well. So think about those Arsenal players like Saka, Rice and Eze, who will not get much of a break at all. They'll miss the start of England's preparation camp in Florida. So it's how they can be managed over time. How you manage those players in the tournament, things are progressing well in the group stage, do you leave players out? What do you do with Harry Kane? He's into his 30s now. He's had a bit of a break because Bayern Munich didn't reach the Champions League final. So since winning the Bundesliga, doesn't often necessarily perform as expected at these tournaments because he's contributed so much in the season. He's scored well over 50 goals for Bayern Munich this season. An absolutely incredible season for him. So yeah, it's about managing those players adeptly, but I don't think we'd put England among necessarily the ultimate favourites for this tournament. Maybe not Scotland either. So the hope, even looking forward, might turn to Euro 2028 when the tournament is being played in the UK and Ireland.
You stared into the whites of his eyes. Genuinely, do you think he thinks he can do it?
He's not being bombastic in terms of what he can say. He's talking about, challenging, not talking about, guaranteeing winning the trophy. But when he arrived, he did talk about adding the second star on the shirts to go alongside the star from 1966. Might temper some of that language. It was just a type of thing that you say when you arrive in the job to show that you've got this confidence, you know what the nation expects of you, why you're being employed. But 48 teams will be going into that World Cup. Some more optimistic than others in terms of delivering the glory. But for England, it's going to be a tournament that will stretch the squad to its limits, stretch everything in terms of their ability to cope with the conditions, to cope with the pressure, and to just cope with being able to take on the strong opposition out there. Spain in particular, so potent. You think of France. Germany will be determined to bounce back from group stage exit at recent tournaments as well.
And that is your lot for today. Do remember to get in touch with your thoughts, not necessarily about whether or not you think Scotland are going to go all the way and win the thing. Maybe a little bit more nosed on what you make of Thomas Tuchel's selection of 26. Why@sky.uk is the email. We're back again Monday.